Welcome to the BJ Show. Let's rock and roll. Rock and roll. Come on, everybody. Let's lose control. Brad and John, they're the ones to follow. Yeah, ready for the ride. It's the BJ Show. BJ Show.
It is the BJ Show. Today is August 5th. The reason I mention that is because of the fact that a lot of people listen to the show into the future. This is the present right now because we're broadcasting it live at this very moment between 7 and 8 o'clock on Westplex 104.5. And a lot of people listen to the show either online, streaming, or actually off air. But a bunch of people listen in the future where they listen on bjshow.co or bjshow.us. John Combest, you know that because you get lots of feedback from people who listen later in the day, correct?
Yeah, that's for real, Brad. And I said for real. That's true, Brad. And we appreciate everybody who shares the word about our show.
Well, you know, I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, but there's a part of the show that I really haven't talked about. We have a new member of the show. You know who I'm talking about, producer Christy.
Oh, I do know, Brad. I've seen her on your Boomer Facebook posts.
Yesterday, I had a meeting with her after the show, and I wanted to really get a good idea of what she thought was going on with the show. And first off, she looked at me right in the eye and she said,
"What would you do with a brain if you had one?"
And then I thought, oh, we're off to a bad start. But this is her critique of yesterday's show. She said, "Very interesting and informative show this morning. Well, right up until the moment that Brad went away off script and with a John Combest impression talking about Sydney Sweeney rolling around naked on Jaguar leather seats. We women listeners collectively groaned. Oh no, not Brad too." That was what her comment was. That's producer Christy's comment about yesterday's show. John, your defense of that?
Yeah, I usually remind Christy she shouldn't talk with her mouth full. Because she usually eats breakfast right after the show, right, Brad?
Yeah. John, lots of stuff to talk about this morning. That is John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. And I've got an interesting question for John in B Block because we're going to talk about his idol, Vladimir Hedgeye. And the guy that
got a pop out of me yesterday. I laughed at that yesterday. Vladimir, I didn't know that Keith was suddenly Russian. That's amazing. Amazing.
Vladimir Hedgeye, because we have to bring in John to discuss a story which just won't go away. And it got more interesting yesterday. And it got into John's shall we say, into his wheelhouse with what's happened yesterday with our president and a woman who at this point in time shall remain nameless. Anyway, that's John Combest. He puts together this amazing site every single day for the past 23 plus years. You go to johncombest.com. You'll see dozens of stories there. Nothing fancy because he uses which version of the web, John?
0.0.
And he puts all these links on there of stuff you should know about. It's sort of like the Matt Drudge report of the state of Missouri. But what we do in this show is we start the show off with this guy right here.
I'm Casey Kasem.
And we count down the top 3 stories according to John Combest. And of course, we start with...
In third place...
Brad, I have to give you a lot of credit because last Monday you asked a valuable question. We were talking about Sonia Jenkins Gray. That's the woman in St. Louis City who had been appointed by Governor Kehoe to serve on her civilian review board, for lack of a better term, the group that would be managing the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. And she gave up a job offer that she had to work in the sheriff's office. She was going to make just shy of $100,000. She gave that job up. Excuse me. And you said, Brad, well, is this woman independently wealthy? Like, why would she just choose a job that paid her zilch versus one that paid her a lot of money? And I pointed out that she was married to a gentleman named Darryl Gray, and he's one of those urban political activists. And I mentioned that, you know, a lot of times urban political activists have a lot of walking around money. You know, different groups toss them a little bit of cash here and there to do their thing. I'm not saying that's what Darryl Gray ever did, but for a lot of urban activists, that's how they put food on the table and pay the light bill. A headline yesterday from Katie Cole of the Post-Dispatch. St. Louis to pay Reverend Darryl Gray to settle Stockley protest arrest. Brad, St. Louis has seen so many urban riots and even suburban riots that sometimes they all run together. But in 2017, the urban crowd decided they would riot and maybe try to get some free stuff via looting because there was a case that involved the killing of a man named Anthony Lamar Smith by St. Louis police officer Jason Stockley. So this was a good excuse for folks to riot. Long story short, Darryl Gray was one of the people at a riot. He got tossed around a little bit by a police officer. And yesterday, finally, he settled with St. Louis City. And he will get $190,000. You know, when he was arrested, Brad, his knees got a little bit skinned up. I don't know if you remember the story. It was tragic, but he got his knees skinned up. Some other folks were actually hit with pepper spray. And Gray had been charged with interfering with a police officer, but that case was later dismissed. So, you know, as you might expect, he's a well-connected urban activist, so he made a big stink about this. And he ends up with $190K for getting a little bit of skinned knees and a few headaches, Brad.
John, you know, I will be, when we get off the air at 8 o'clock, at 8:05, I'll be more than happy to have a police officer skin my knees and spray me with a little pepper spray for $190K. You know what I'm saying, John?
I know. Usually that's what you call a first date.
That's exactly right.
I mean, you're familiar with the taste of mace, aren't you?
Yes.
But I also forgot to point out, though, Brad, Darryl Gray's glasses were broken during the arrest. Let's not forget that his glasses were broken. Maybe we could take him to Harry Eggleston and he could get some LASIK.
Why do you keep bringing up Harry Eggleston again? Is he's retired? He's long gone, isn't he?
I don't have any idea, Brad. But because he ran for Congress. People who've been around for a while will remember that he ran for Congress.
Eagle Eye Care. He had a place right there on 270 northbound, about a quarter mile
listen,
south
Brad,
of
you should be
Howell.
defending him because he didn't botch your LASIK surgery.
No, he didn't. That was
He's not
another.
responsible for that. But let's get back to Darryl Gray.
Okay.
To talk about this, Brad. I mean, Darryl probably has some income from other areas, you know, and $190K, you know, that'll probably pay, you know, the Ameren bill for at least a few months.
And the important thing, for those of you who don't know this, when you get a legal decision like that, where you get cash from a legal case, John can tell us the amount of taxes you pay on that. John, how many taxes do you pay on that?
0.0.
There's 100% of your settlement goes in your pocket. There's no government.
Well, after the lawyer gets his taste, right?
Yes, right. But as far as the government's concerned, there's no tax on that. There's no FICA, FUTA, FUI, SUI, are all the Medicare.
So that's a pretty good deal, Brad. So you know what? If Sonia might have had some kind of idea that this payment was going to be coming to her husband, and maybe she can go a few more months without, you know, working out some kind of consulting deal with some lobbying group or something, you know?
You know, John, you know, there's an old saying about being well connected. Is this a perfect example of this again?
Well, I mean, there's many sayings about that. I thought you were going to say something blue or off color there, Brad.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's, you know, here's the thing. This gentleman Darryl Gray might have gotten some cash. Lord knows that the city has paid out a ton of money to people who pretended to have injuries or who claimed that they were injured by the police, you know, whatever, during some of these riots. So Lord knows that Darryl Gray isn't an exception here in getting a payout. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time, could claim some injuries. And now he's, you know, got $190K in his bank account.
John, I know I tell stories from time to time. I don't think I've ever told this story before. My grandfather, who I really never knew, my grandfather on my mother's side, so my maternal grandfather, was an attorney. And he died at 62 to 63. I was only like 2 years old at the time, so I really didn't know him. And my mom, during his last year or so of life, he worked for the city of St. Louis. And he defended lawsuits against the city of St. Louis. This is a true story. And he was not in good shape. And my mom would drive down to, I guess, City Hall back in the day, and at lunchtime, and take him out to lunch. And in downtown St. Louis, back in the day, there were lots of people, lots of activity on the streets of St. Louis, and people walking around. And my mom would tell me the stories that they were walking down the street almost every day. There was someone who said, and his name was Winner. His first name was Albert. His last name was Winner, Winner. And people would walk by and say, "Hi, Mr. Winter, how you doing?" And my mom would say to my father, "Who's that?" And he would say, "Oh, that guy sued us over stepping into a hole in the street, or that
pothole, and wanted a settlement."
Right, or that guy sued us because of the fact he tripped over a crack in the sidewalk." And my mom would tell me about how that's all he did. He just handled nuisance lawsuits. And most of the time, they settled with the people. I mean, if they were really egregious to the point where they found out that the guy was nowhere near what he claimed what happened. But most of the time, it's like, okay, just write him a check. And that's what they did.
Yeah. I have I'd call him an acquaintance who worked for the law firm that represented a major casino in the St. Louis area, Brad. I won't say the name of it, but if you were an American and you happen to be a star, you might go to this casino. And he handled the slips and falls lawsuits. And he said probably the best part of the job was watching the video and watching people pretend to walk by and do a big dramatic pratfall and then ask for a little bit of cash,
And would they give him a little bit of cash?
Yeah, they would look at it and say, okay, when the person did this pratfall, did they actually get injured? Do we know that they have a history of doing this at other casinos? And so, a lot of times people just get cash and it's its own cottage industry.
John, I think I'm going to start going, and the crazy thing about it was I was at these Stokely protests. Matter of fact, it's funny, I pulled up one of my cameras the other day and I found a whole bunch of footage and a whole bunch of pictures from the Stokely protests. I should have fallen down.
I think that's what happened to your hip, Brad.
Yeah, that police officer tripped me. He walked by me and I didn't look where I was walking and I tripped over his foot and I fell and I broke my glasses. Of course, I didn't have glasses at the time, but that's a whole other story. Okay, ready for number 2? John, are we ready for number 2?
I'm ready to go.
Okay.
Up a notch to number 2.
This is the type of factoid that you would like to keep in your back pocket, Brad. This is very much a Brad Hildebrand data point. In 29 months of Missouri offering cannabis for sale, Missouri has reached $2.9 billion of sales. Brad, that is way more in cannabis sales in the first 2.5 years than Colorado had in their first 29 months. And it's in the neighborhood of what Illinois had in their first 29 months. This story is brought to us by Missouri Business Alert, which was reprinted by the Columbia Missourian student newspaper in Columbia. But Brad, I thought it was a fascinating point because when we think of Colorado, we think of, like Colorado and Oregon and California as being like pothead central for recreational cannabis sales, but Missouri actually outpaced Colorado. And I looked it up. Missouri has roughly the same population as Colorado, a couple 100,000 more. But we have eclipsed Colorado in the first 1.5 years for recreational cannabis sales, Brad. Isn't that something to be proud of?
John, don't get me going on this. I'm more and more every day. It's funny. Almost every day I think about this. Who's your buddy, Mr. Hemp dude? What's his name again?
Oh, Ethan Thampy.
Right. Okay. And are they still going to go ahead with this constitutional amendment? Is that what they're going to try to do?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything different. So I think the plans are still to go gather signatures.
And essentially what they're going to do, they're just going to blow it wide open. They're just going to essentially say, hey, this whole cartel of the cannabis operations under the current state constitutional amendment, we're just going to blow it open where I could legally take the crap transmitter site and plant marijuana on there and just be like, hey, I don't need a license. It's all legal now, right? That's essentially what
I wouldn't say they'd blow it that wide open, Brad, but excuse me, I think you're not too far off. And most importantly, they would allow some of these hemp products that I think it's fair to say are arbitrarily excluded from being able to be sold. And they'd go to the cannabis cartel and say, hey, you don't own the rights to sell everything. There's a line in that movie, King of New York, where the Christopher Walken character says, if a dime bag is sold in Central Park, I want in. And that's essentially what the cannabis cartel is saying.
Yeah, I hear you. But the counties are out as far as if the muni's in a county, they don't get any money anymore. That was last week's story, right?
Yeah. Steve Ellman, he was a big pot peddler. He got a lot of money from those cannabis sales, Brad. He's got to be disappointed.
As all the people are, because, well, I won't say anymore. Okay, and now the number
1.
The hits keep on coming for people who either believe that the Epstein list was a real tangible list, or people who thought, hey, maybe we can make some political hay out of this. Democrats, Brad, recently have become big proponents of releasing the Epstein list. They've joined some Republicans. Have you seen Democrats pile on about this, Brad?
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, for 4 years, they had all this stuff when Biden was the president. We had, what's his name, Merrick Garland as the Attorney General. If it was so explosive, and everybody's saying it's explosive because it's got Trump all over it, why didn't they release it then? You know what I'm saying?
You're exactly. I mean, I happen to agree with you, Brad. And I do think, well, I don't want to step on the headline here, so let me get to that. The Washington Missourian today, headline, Wagner, as in Ann Wagner, faces criticism over Epstein investigation. Now, there's not enough room in the headline, I think, to point out that the criticism she's facing are from local Democrats. And to the credit of the reporter, Christopher Parker from the Missourian, he points out that the criticism is coming from, quote, left-wing political nonprofit Progress Mo, formerly known as Progress Missouri. They're criticizing Ann Wagner because it's generally the theory, Brad, that suddenly, Trump was saying that we have an Epstein list, and then he changed his mind, probably because Trump is on the Epstein list. The point is, they're criticizing Ann Wagner because she's done a lot of work, high-profile work, on sex trafficking. She's one of the nation's premier legislative leaders in that topic. And they say, well, if you're so great about sex trafficking, why aren't you pushing harder for the release of the Epstein list? They also quote a woman, Brad, who ran for state rep against a guy named Brad Banderman. He's the state rep from St. Clair. That woman, her name is Amy Thompson from Pacific. She's quoted in here criticizing Ann Wagner. Ms. Thompson lost and a 44-point nail biter in November. Brad, I mean, those are the worst kind of elections because you think, man, if I had just put up a few more yard signs, I could have overcome that 44-point deficit. I think the point is, Brad, the headaches that come from this, I think Pam Bondi made a mistake when she was saying the Epstein list is on my desk, and she was suggesting to everyone that we'd get some sort of a celebrity list. And I don't think the list ever existed. And I think Ann Wagner has a good point here. And she says that when documents are, here's a quote from Ann Wagner. Jeffrey Epstein was evil, and I hope he rots in hell for what he did to so many innocent children. If the courts can unseal relevant documents while protecting the victims of his heinous crimes, I fully support that transparency. I don't know what more you can say if you're Ann Wagner there.
John, I have a contrarian view in this whole thing.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
I would love to be on the Epstein list. Because that means that you at some point were flying on one of the Hoffman's planes and landing on one of the Hoffman's landing strips, right, Brad? No, the idea being is that in today's society with everything on YouTube and all the socials and things like that, I mean, you could make a nice 6, possibly 7-figure income off of saying, yeah, the list came out. Brad Hildebrand was on that list. And I would be doing interview shows all over the place. I'd have like a Facebook page, and for boomers only. I'd have, I would.
Producer Christy might not lecture you after the segment.
Right. I could go on all the morning talk shows, be on with Gayle King. Now, Brad, what were you doing on the Epstein list? Well, Gayle, let me tell you, you could make a fortune out of that. Matter of fact, you could make more money than having your glasses broken and your knees skinned up by the city police. You know what I'm saying?
And that's a ton of money. That's $190K.
Right. See, and the goofy thing about this is, and just yesterday, did you hear this little dust up between Trump and Charlemagne the God?
No. Well, maybe mention this when we come back, Brett, because I didn't hear anything about that.
Well, remind me to do it in the C block, because it's sort of interesting, because Charlemagne the God says there are 2 things that Donald Trump needs to do with this presidency. and you will never guess what one of them is. And to me, because they had a fight back and forth where he, once again, it's the typical Trump. If somebody comes at him, he calls them low IQ. That's his favorite thing.
Yeah.
He's low IQ, and to the point where, like, if he called me low IQ, I'd go like, yeah, thanks, John, because people used to call me no IQ. Now at least I have a low IQ.
All that means is that someone just got your Hazelwood School District transfer.
Right. Okay. We have to take a break.